Welcome back to the Traverse Tavern. Before we begin, please make sure you like, comment, subscribe. It's the best way to support us in making new videos for you all to enjoy. Today we're going to be taking a look at one of the most interesting reveals from Rise of the Floodborn and analyzing how it affects the current card pool. That card is Morph, Space Goo, a 2-cost, 2/1 Emerald rare card with 1 lore and the ability Mimicry. You may play any character with Shift on this character as if this character had any name. As soon as I saw this card, my mind started flooding with potential decks that are made possible because of this card specifically. So instead of just listing them out and talking about them, I decided to gather a few friends to help construct a full tier list of the Floodborns from set 1 and set 2, ranking them from most improved to least improved. Most improved. Reserved for the cards that I think will be incredibly impactful cards in the new decks being constructed. Greatly improved. Cards that received a large increase in playability from Morph existing. This can mean going from unplayable to niche play, or going from being played already to being highly impactful cards in that ink type. Improved. Cards that got better with Morph, but not by a wide enough margin to be super excited about. Least/not improved. Cards that are either not helped by Morph at all, or so little that it doesn't really change the card that much. Now that we have our tiers, let's give it up for our guests.
Hello everyone, my name is Nicholas Larson, or some of you might know me as Nikosan05 from other forms of social media. Franz has allowed me to be able to share my ideas of how Morph plans to shake up the meta when it comes to Floodborns when Into the Inklands comes out. I know talking about Floodborns, the most notable one that we have in the game right now is Beast, Tragic Hero. The ranking that I gave this card is greatly improved, and my reasoning behind that is Beast is one of those cards that you immediately have to deal with when he hits the board. And right now, he doesn't enter play until you reach 5 ink. But with Morph being released, it fixes the issue we've had so far when it comes to Tragic Hero, and that's being no smaller shift target for him to shift onto. Beast is a card that you want to establish as soon as you have him available to you. Being able to play him down for 3 ink instead of 5 will surely bring up his value a lot more in the meta. Finally, all Emerald Steel players can now rejoice about not being locked into playing the dreaded discard deck, and might be able to have more creative freedom deck building wise with Morph on release. The other card that I wanted to briefly talk about is Queen of Hearts, Sensing Weakness. The ranking that I gave her was also greatly improved. Morph allows you to have a better shift target for her instead of using her smaller 2-cost counterpart that you normally want to have in combination with her ability to take out any annoying characters on the board while also replacing the card you just put down. The Queen of Hearts has also been hindered by the fact that you mostly end up playing her for 5 ink, making it almost impossible to catch up back in the game, but by being able to put this down when you have 3 or 4 ink with more characters to play around her, you can now gain tempo back with also getting card draw. I'm surely hoping that a new Ruby Emerald Challenger deck becomes something new that we can see with the release of Into the Inklands.
Hey everyone, it's Zach Bivens. You can find me on Twitter at ZachBivens1, where I go over the way too many Lorcana tournaments that I travel way too far to get to. I just won a big 1K tournament this past weekend, so you can find my deck as well as my thoughts and tournament coverage on my Twitter. Morph is an exciting card with potential to create flexibility within deck building and during gameplay. Let's start by talking about how it can improve a card that everyone knows and loves, Rockstar Stitch. How many times have you played a 1-cost Stitch on turn 1, only for your opponent to do everything in their power to banish it before you get to shift on turn 4? But add Morph into the equation, and now you have 8 early game shift targets instead of 4. Not only does Morph improve your odds of shifting into Rockstar, but Morph is also a 2-cost character that can be used to draw a card with Stitch's ability, and pose that imminent threat of what it could shift into on the following turn. Morph offers some nice utility to Rockstar Stitch. I think I'd put Stitch in the improved category for now, and excited to see how it plays out. Now, onto a card that has been on absolutely no one's radar in the Rise of the Floodborn meta, Fairy Godmother. Fairy Godmother is not a bad card by any means. In fact, she was actually played as a 4-of in the very first deck that made it to number 1 on the ladder, when set 2 was initially released, but then she immediately dropped off and was never seen again. I'm talking about dropped off the face of the earth within a day, and if you weren't paying close attention, you likely didn't even know that she saw play for that brief amount of time either. Her effect is powerful, giving all your characters Challenger +3 and the ability to come back to your hand instead of the discard pile when banished. This could certainly turn a game around, but she's got quite a few weaknesses, one being that it costs 5 ink to hard player, a steep cost, and the Fairy Godmothers that she could shift onto are just too expensive and not good enough to justify playing. With Morph, however, you don't have to worry about wasting deck space on the smaller copies to shift onto, or even waste that 5 ink to play the Floodborn outright. Morph gives you that surprise shift factor, which with a much lower 2 ink cost. Now, with all that said, time will tell if Fairy Godmother does see any play in the future, but I'd say that Morph greatly improves her as a card.
Hey guys, this is Skinner from First to 20. You can find me at Twitter on First to 20 or on youtube.com/First to 20. And when I think about Morph as a new card, it's a very exciting card. and it's obviously going to be a huge impact for all Floodborns. But the ones that I think that are least improved, I think would probably be Lady Tremaine. Unfortunately, we already have a 2-drop Lady Tremaine, even though it is uninkable, but it is a 2/2 that has an effect on it. So for that reason, unless we're playing some kind of green-red brew where we want to be playing Tremaines and Morph, I don't see Lady Tremaine getting too much of an improvement, so I'm going to put her in the least improved. And then when it comes to a greatly improved card, I think we can't not think about Tinkerbell Giant Fairy. This card is a menace, and we really don't like playing the 3-drop Tinkerbell all too often. Most of the time, the only reason we play the lower drop Tinkerbell is so that we can shift in, and now we have Morph, which allows us to do it for cheaper, and it's going to open up some really cool options for Green Steel, which I think is going to be a sleeper hit in the next set.
Steadfast here to talk about Morph and how he affects some of our existing Floodborn characters. Let's take a look at 2 of my favorites and consider how Morph can improve their chances of seeing play going into set 3. Let's start out with Belle, Hidden Archer. First of all, any Emerald Floodborn has a native advantage on this list because you can already combo them with Morph within any Emerald deck without worrying about specific ink pairings. For example, Belle and Morph could work in an Amber discard deck, or they could be added to a Steel aggro deck or something. That flexibility is important as set 3 introduces new deck archetypes. And currently, Belle doesn't have any good shift targets. She has her 3-cost Emerald Belle and 3-cost Sapphire Belle, but both are just not great. In particular, with the small Emerald Belle, she's a 3-cost uninkable, which means you must commit up to 8 uninkable slots in your deck for the full Emerald Belle combo. And even then, you're shifting in Hidden Archer Belle for the same cost, losing 1 vital willpower in the process. In contrast, when you add Morph to the equation, Belle gains a natural curve of turn 2 Morph into the 3-cost shift. And throughout all that, Morph remains an inkable card for flexibility. After all is said and done, Belle Hidden Archer is still a fragile card, but there's no doubting that the addition of Morph is a welcome one for Hidden Archer fans, and will certainly improve her chances of seeing play in the next set. Next up, I think it's time for Hades, King of Olympus, to have his time in the spotlight, and I think Morph could be the major catalyst we need. After all, Emerald does have a lot of villains ready to combo with this villain king, and with even more Amber and Emerald villains coming in set 3, such as Ursula, Rourke, and Queen of Hearts, we might just have the recipe for success. It's also possible I might be getting baited by the prospect of a villains deck once more, but to be fair, one of the major setbacks up until now was the consistency of getting Hades out on board. He does cost a fat 8 ink, and even when he's shifting in, it takes 6 ink to get him out. Morph can't help in regards to his cost, but similar to Belle, Morph does offer Hades a secondary shift target that's inkable, and I think that could make a big difference. Using Morph with Hades will still likely feel a bit slow, but I do think there's potential for him to improve in set 3 as a whole, and I think Morph could be a piece of the puzzle needed for a villain's deck to work. I won't make any promises of a huge new meta deck or anything like that, but I am hopeful that Hades will finally escape the unplayable status he's experienced in the first 2 sets. If you want to hear more from me about Lorcana strategy, tune in to my YouTube channel called Steadfast.
A huge thank you to our guests. Please be sure to give them a follow and subscription at the links in the description down below. Now we'll move on with the rest of the tier list, starting with Amber. The Queen Commanding Presence. I put this in least/not improved. We have a 1-drop shift target for Queen already, and despite adding some consistency, I don't see her being used in a Floodborn Amber Emerald deck. Rapunzel Gifted Artist. Least/not improved. We currently have a better Rapunzel target as a 2-drop, and similar to the Queen, I don't see her ability being useful in this kind of deck. The 6 willpower and 2 lore early feels not bad, but with Mims running around, I think this still gets eaten alive pretty easily. Mulan Reflecting. Improved. Not having great Mulan shift targets in general gives Mulan a good boost. I can see a discard aggro song deck in Amber Emerald that plays flutes, aerials, and a critical mass of songs so that this can hit something off the top of the deck a decent amount of the time, but I don't think it's consistent enough to make waves. Snow White Well-Wisher. Greatly improved. The biggest problem with this card was that you lacked decent shift targets and couldn't justify playing small Snow White enough that this came out on 4 too often. I think with the addition of Morph, you'll see hyper aggro decks running this as top end to bring back small 2 or 3 lore characters as final pushes against removal decks. Moving on to Amethyst. Madame Mim, Rival of Merlin. Least/not improved. This card is currently in tech territory right now, and with insane shift targets already, I don't see Morph moving this in any direction. It may see play in a bounce version of Amethyst Emerald, but I don't think this is doing a ton. Yzma, scary beyond all reason. Least/not improved. This card was played already as a tech/2 to 3 of in Ruby Amethyst, not because of its shift ability or because of its stats, but because it was a flexible removal/tempo play later in the game. I don't think having access to another shift target means I'm going to want to play this more on turns 4 or 5. Pinocchio on the run, greatly improved. Now on the complete other end of the spectrum, we have Pinocchio, who saw absolutely zero play because his shift targets were either being played sparingly or they never wanted to shift on top of 3 lore. I think Amethyst Emerald has a Floodborn deck brewing, and if you're already playing Morph as a 4 of, being able to play Pinocchio on 3 to bounce anything your opponent's played regularly, and Quest for 2 feels like a very good tempo play in that deck. Dr. Facilier, Agent Provocateur, greatly improved. Another shifter that is able to bring your characters back to the hand when banished. This gets better when your opponent doesn't immediately know that you can possibly shift into it next turn when they are staring at a smaller Facilier card the turn before. This card was almost completely dead in the water, and will surely see experimentation now that it is less telegraphed. Elsa, Spirit of Winter, most improved. This is going to be the crown jewel of the Amethyst Emerald deck. A big issue with shifting Elsa before was that you weren't playing smaller Elsas as much, but now if you're already playing 4 Morph, having the option to either shift into Elsa into a board of exerted cards, or shift into something like Fairy Godmother or Facilier into a board of exerted cards, puts your opponent in a really tough slot. Add in Bibbidi Bobbidi Boo and Blue Fairy into the mix, and you have a potent combination that may even push for top tier meta contention. Moving on to Morph's own home, Emerald, Flynn Rider and Donald Duck, least/not improved. Morph isn't being played in the discard deck. These cards aren't being played outside of the discard deck. Unless you're trying to make Queen OTK work, these aren't that good. Genie, Powers Unleashed, improved. Previously, you either had horrible shift targets for Genie, or you didn't want to shift over Genie on the job. Now you have the option to put this in a deck as a tech evasive with 3 lore with better stats than Ray, who is already being played right now, and the ability gives upside in decks that like 5 cost actions, like Steel, Sapphire, and Ruby. Mickey Mouse, Artful Rogue, improved. Similar to Genie, the Mickey shift targets were mediocre at best unless you were shifting over Detective. Now you have a 4 of in a Floodborn deck that Rogue could come down and Quest/Sing and hopefully immediately stun one of your opponent's cards. And at shift cost of 5, it has fantastic stats. Cheshire Cat, From the Shadows, greatly improved. Even though I'm not a believer of the ping deck, I like cards that can be useful outside of a specific archetype, and this is one of them. 5/6 with 2 lore and evasive, and has the ability to immediately pop something that's damaged or make any small guy trade 1-for-1. We didn't see Cheshire Cat or Emerald a ton in the first 2 sets, but if any Floodborn deck including Morph is played, Cheshire Cat will absolutely be considered. Next is Ruby, Scar, Shameless Firebrand, least/not improved. I think it's time for a hard truth, you guys. This card sucks. Minnie Mouse, Wide-Eyed Diver, least/not improved. It's an evasive that has upside in an action deck. I don't think Morph changes much besides its consistency of having a decent shift target for her, but I don't see it being enough. Raya, Leader of Heart, improved. This is an interesting character that can do some damage in the early game. A big issue is that she didn't have any shift targets you wanted to play. If you're already playing a Morph in this ink pairing because of something else, Raya becomes a 4-drop rush character that almost always goes 2-for-1. Sounds good, but we have Maui 1 turn later, so this is probably a marginal increase in playability, if that. Aladdin, Heroic Outlaw, greatly improved. Aladdin on 5 was a set 1 staple, and now you have a secondary shift character that becomes more consistent and easier to set up. It was already a good card, but dropped off in set 2. Morph alone gives potential for a new deck, and Emerald Ruby has some interesting lore control tools already. I'm excited to see what this does. Moving right along with Sapphire. Aurora, Dreaming Guardian, improved. Having another 2-drop option for Aurora helps the consistency of this coming out on turn 3. The big issue is that she's not a payoff in her own right. She wants to protect the payoff. Early ward will always be strong though, so I expect to see this pop up more frequently going forward. Cruella de Vil, Perfectly Wretched, greatly improved. Combat tricks in early game can be a huge tempo gain, but this also just has the ability to get trades in the mid game as well. Being one of 3 Sapphire cards that shift for 3 also makes it harder for your opponent to parse what you're trying to do, which could lead to mistakes. Cogsworth, Grandfather Clock, greatly improved. Already a staple in Sapphire decks because of ward and resist, it makes sense that getting resist out faster would be even better. Now you can't sing Whole New World if you're playing with this Morph, but Let It Go is still there, so you have options. Basil, Great Mouse Detective, greatly improved, going from completely unplayable to a severely needed draw 2 in an ink pair that doesn't have tons of draw power, and having 3 lore never feels bad. I think this is a sneaky winner of Morph. Gaston, intellectual powerhouse. Most improved, selective card draw off the top 3 is already powerful. Doing so on a 4/4 body on turn 4 with 3 lore is very powerful, potentially being a cornerstone for arguably the worst ink pair in the game through the first 2 sets and making that deck potentially playable as an aggro mid-range deck, and with the most powerful form of removal in sending to the Inkwell, I think that's worthy of one of our top 2 spots right now. And finally, Steel. Cinderella, Hercules, Jafar, Captain Hook, all greatly improved. All 4 of these cards lacked a consistent access to good shift targets, but now if you're playing Emerald Steel, you have at least 4 Morph, so now instead of looking for both sides of these, you can plan more, and the Floodborns become more of a toolbox that you can use to confuse your opponent with your plays. The biggest issue with Floodborns in the past is how telegraphed they are. Now with Morph, you don't need to telegraph anything besides something is coming, and all of these Steel cards can and will punish different plays that your opponent will do. Emerald Steel is a deck that I am looking at very closely. In conclusion, I think Morph changes the way we think about shift characters overall, and might even change the landscape of how decks are created. Keep an eye out for Emerald Amethyst, Emerald Steel, and Emerald Sapphire as Floodborn decks that can take the meta by storm. One last thank you to Steadfast, Zach Bivens, Nicholas Larson, and First to 20 for hopping on and helping me out with this. That's all for today. Please like, subscribe, and comment your most improved Floodborn character down below. We appreciate your support, and I'll see you next time at the Traverse Tavern.